Traditionally, I think that saver would be referred to as a codependent, somebody who's invested in the relationship remaining the way it is, very much like the addict is, and hence not wanting to get well.
And I can hear people in the audience screaming, "No, I really want them to get sober." Do you?
Real life for real families. Hurts, habits, and hang-ups happen in every family.
Jerry and I are here with tools to help you trust God, clean house, and tell the truth to ramp up the joy in your family.
You have what it takes.
It's time to become sober on purpose for His purpose. And we are talking about reestablishing roles after sobriety happens in a marriage.
So like family roles.
Like family roles. Oftentimes in an addictive marriage, one person, it can do a lot of different things.
I would agree with that. I think that's the standard model that we see happening in families where there's an addict or a chemical addict. I think what I see is a lot of willing participants in the establishment of the roles. They're making adjustments, and they're in survival mechanisms, and they're doing things that are going to maintain the crisis situation, or more specifically, maintain the family during a crisis situation.
For me, this is what I tell people. I said, I didn't marry a man who was an addict because I was well. I needed somebody I could control. I needed somebody that I could save. And I talk about that a little bit in Sober on Purpose Family Guide, is when the saver can't save somebody, they don't know what to do with their time either. It's not just about the chemical dependent getting well. It's also about the relationship addict, or however, the codependent, however you want to call them. They need to take themselves in hand and figure out who they are at the same time. So this reestablishing roles is part of the reason why the breakdown of the family happens after sobriety, because the saver doesn't know who they are anymore.
Why don't we talk a little bit about how the breakdown happens?
Well, it's what our therapist called equity rescuing. A person who has been the saver is still trying to rescue something that doesn't or hasn't existed. They're often trying to rescue a relationship or a pattern that is crumbling in sobriety instead of choosing to get well. In fact, they are really fighting getting well is what they're doing.
Personally, I think that saver would be referred to as a codependent, somebody who's invested in the relationship remaining the way it is, very much like the addict is, and hence not wanting to get well.
And I can hear people in the audience screaming, "No, I really want them to get sober." Do you? I mean, that suddenly puts two adults in a relationship where you might have been making all the decisions, and taking care of everything. I know you're tired, but do you really want to have another adult in there? One of the things that I realized was I had to let go of some control. I had to let go of some of my decision-making abilities, and I had to say, look, I need to respect you as another human being, as a full human being in this relationship.
Yeah, I remember when we were establishing those new roles. I think to some extent we still struggle with maintaining the equality within the family structure.
It has not been easy, and it wasn't something I expected. And like we said in the opening episode, a lot of times marriages fail after sobriety. You may have, as I did, kicked, screamed, called on neighbors, went to your own program, done all those types of things, begged God for your husband or your child or whoever to get sober. And then when it happens, you're not sure who you are, and they're certainly not sure who they are.
Yeah, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about how when the addict or the alcoholic becomes sober, often they engage in this rigorous spiritual journey of self-reflection and cleaning up the past and working on themselves at very deep intellectual and spiritual levels, which a lot of times leaves the rest of the family behind. They take a ton of time, they take a ton of energy, and they work on becoming well, or at least more well. And I think in my experience, I know in my experience that what I've seen in our family and what I've seen in other families who are going through this time period is it can really call out some of the weaknesses, or better yet, inconsistencies or issues that the other individuals in the family might have wanted to work on. Very much like when somebody around you wins the lottery. You want to be happy for them, but let's face it, instinctually, we tend to be a little jealous as humans and resentful of the fact, or somebody gets a big promotion that we didn't necessarily think that they deserved, or just there's a windfall. And isn't it natural, if we're honest with ourselves, to just feel like that should have been me, or it's not fair, or to just all of a sudden realize that all of the inadequacies that we have and wish we didn't.
There's kind of a joke around Al-Anon is that now Jerry didn't go away for treatment. He certainly put in his time, but he stayed local and kept working. That, if it's a chemical dependent, they get to go away for 30 days. They get to work on themselves. They get to have, meals and all those things taken care of. And the person who's been holding the family together the whole time is still holding the family together the whole time. There's no 30 days to pull myself together. And that's where often the breakdown happens. And I think you could speak to the selfishness of the program itself.
I've also seen in my experience and in other people's lives where there's a sobriety that happens when the addict goes into crash courses in spiritual awareness and turning over control to their creator, and that they really feel like they've touched on this magical pill, if you will, or this miraculous discovery, and they want to share it with everyone, particularly those in the household. And it can really come off as, and it probably is, arrogant and a lack of sensitivity to the wreckage that they have caused. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about how an addict after sobriety is very much like a family that was in the storm cellar during a massive tornado or hurricane. And after it blows over, they come up and everybody's looking out on the wreckage of the farm, and, the buildings are destroyed and the fence is all wrecked. And they say, okay, well, the storm's passed. Let's go ahead and get about our lives and have a good old time.
It really becomes a struggle for the family of, wait a minute, we're still here holding the bag going, you haven't connected with us for over 2 years, and suddenly you want everything to be okay. And I don't think it's really everything is okay.
No, if anything, there's a bunch of uncertainty, and there is a change, a major structural change within the family unit, which is a major adjustment. It's very much like a massive move or a career change, if not more traumatic, where everyone else has to now adjust to the new circumstances.
And I think the other thing is we look at this and say, oh, they're sober. That means immediately they're going to be able to take on full adult responsibilities. They're going to be able to handle all the things they couldn't handle before. And the big book does promise that will happen, but not in the first 90 days or not in the first year. It has taken a while, and that's not just the recovery from chemical addiction. That's, as Jerry was saying, the whole shift. It is very much like a move. The whole shift, everybody is affected by the shift. If one person gets well, if one person gets better or changes their life for the better, everybody has to shift around and figure out how they're going to respond to it. They may not choose to feel that this is a good thing.
Yeah, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my insight was that in our family, when I started down the path and started working the steps, it was very much like there was the children and yourself who were able to have the scapegoat of, well, if he would just get sober, then everything would be well. And when I did get sober, all of a sudden, it wasn't a silver bullet that fixed everything. And now it was time to look at some of the other causes, which might have been at the root of our insecurity as a family. Would you say that was accurate?
Yeah, and it certainly was not a silver bullet, even though I'd been participating in Al-Anon for a long time. I knew a lot of marriages failed during the sobriety stage, and I was really trying hard to be ready, but I wasn't ready. It brought me face to face with my own issues at a very deep level. I remember screaming at our therapist because he would not see us in the time frame that I wanted him to see us to fix this marriage right now. I couldn't push him around because he was a healthy person and he was not going to let me cross his boundaries. And that's where I had to look at, hey, I am making some crazy, crazy moves right now because my whole world has shifted in a way that I thought I wanted, but it shifted so dramatically that I wasn't quite sure who I was at that point.
Well, I'm flattered that you would have considered me a healthy person that early in sobriety, but in hindsight, I'm looking back on it, and I would certainly not call myself a healthy person. But
no, I said our therapist. I was trying to push our therapist around.
Got it. I misunderstood. See. So obviously listening skills are something we're still focusing on as part of our character defects. And by our, I mean mine. I think that Tanya's absolutely right when she talks about, this is very common. And even the addict obviously has to reestablish those roles and set boundaries and self-reflect and keep inventory on where they're going wrong and what they can improve on day to day. And 10th step work that we talk about. And yeah, I just think that's a really good insight, Tanya. I appreciate you bringing that up.
In the Christian component of this, I had to step out and really walk the talk of what I thought I believed, because the person who was supposed to be my husband was unable to be my husband at that time and hadn't really been my husband for the last couple of years. He had really distanced himself from the family, and we had helped with that. We had created a vibrant social life without him because he just wasn't there. And so I had to step in and say, okay, God, if you're telling me I need to stay married, how is that going to look? Who do I trust? What do I trust? Because as you're reestablishing these roles, and we'll talk about this in another episode, there are a lot of voices telling you what you should do and how you should do it and where you should do it. And that's not just in your head. Because when a breakup of this magnitude happens, everybody you work with, dear friends, people at church, all kinds of folks will tell you their opinion. If asked for or not asked for, it doesn't matter.
Along those same lines, I can personally remember being in early recovery, and we were separated at that time, and I wanted nothing more than to preserve my marriage and to be able to see my children every day, which was something that I wasn't enjoying at that time. And I was seeking advice. In early recovery from chemical addiction, it's often suggested that you get a sponsor and that you let them pretty much run your life, let them make the decisions for you for about the first year, which is something that I did, and it was working well for me. The sponsor that I was working with for the majority of my early sobriety was divorced multiple times, and I'm asking him for advice on how to maintain my marriage. And it wasn't until months later when I met with a gentleman who wasn't even practicing in recovery, but was an addict or was a recovering addict. He said to me, and it wasn't even on topic, but he was talking about how it's so common to be in these rooms and be surrounded by people who have multiple divorces or have at least a divorce and are divorced and are single, and we're asking them for relationship advice. They might not have a lot of experience in how to maintain a marriage.
And I was still attending Al-Anon meetings on a regular basis, was going to church. We both were going to church, and we were talking with our pastor. We both had therapists at the time. And I also worked in a salon. Very interesting, diverse opinions, unsolicited, for you should just leave him, you deserve better than this shouldn't have to put up with this, or maybe, honey, it'll work out. Very diverse opinions. And I had to really filter out what people were telling me about what my role should be. I really focused on God-centered women and relationships that I knew God was asking me to stay married. I also knew I wanted to stay married. Having been through a divorce, I knew what the other side looked like. So in formulating my role, I really had to figure out who I was in this space. Again, I don't think it ever stops. You get to some points where you can feel comfortable. What nobody tells you outright, except for the women who have been through it, is this is just the beginning. We think sobriety is the end, but it's just the beginning of figuring out who you are in this relationship. It's like being in a whole new relationship again, because I didn't know Jerry at any point before he was using. So he didn't know who he was. I didn't know who he was. We had 2 children who are trying to figure out who they are as this is going on. It was really quite the struggle to figure out the role. Trusting God was a big thing, but we did some really great things to clean house too.
Yeah, I want to go back a little bit to, I want to roll back just a touch to touch on, to cover something which was said to me. I remember asking, my second sponsor, I met with him because he didn't just say yes. So he's like, let's meet, let's talk about it. After I asked him to be my sponsor. And at that meeting, he said, why do you want me to be your sponsor? And I said, well, I think, you have a lot of character strengths that I want to get. And also I think you have a lot of life experience and I seek your advice. And he said, oh, well, I don't give advice. I only talk about my experience. And that's something that I've really taken to the bank with me. I do my best to only talk about experience. And even when I use language to say, well, it has been my experience that, as opposed to, this is what I think or this is what I feel. And if I'm using language like this is what I think, then odds are I'm talking about something that I don't have a ton of experience with. We're talking about unsolicited opinions and stuff. I think it's best. It's been my experience that that I'm best served when I go to people who I believe have experience on the topic that I'm seeking advice for and have been able to achieve the results that I am trying to achieve.
And I agree with Jerry. And I had to look at cleaning my own house out of the people who were taking me in the direction I knew was not right for me. And some of those were very close family members too. I had to be gentle and kind and say, this is the direction I'm going. I needed to surround myself with people who were headed in that direction. And that was based on biblical understanding, talking to my pastor, talking to my therapist, and getting really quiet and centered on what I knew I needed to do. Because the world is going to tell you a lot of things. So in cleaning my own house, I had to get quiet and understand who I was and who I wanted to be. Did I want another divorce? Was that really where I was headed? Was that really going to serve me? So what are our tips for reestablishing roles after sobriety?
Is just to have good, clear, consistent, and well-maintained boundaries. I think now as I look into my history and into the pains of my past, we can put all these clinical terms on it, but at the end of the day, it's all just a matter of bad boundaries, whether it's me setting boundaries with myself or me setting boundaries with the people in my life, or not being able to maintain those boundaries once they're set, or having unhealthy boundaries. It's just about having good, consistent boundaries and making sure that we're enforcing them.
And for me, it's about making sure your first line of contact is between you and God and getting clarity on what His plans are for you. And that can be done through scripture, through meditation time, talking with your spiritual director, advisor, pastor, whoever that is. It's garbage in, garbage out. If you're putting people around you who are just telling you what the world tells you, you're at high risk of losing what may be the most important to you. You have to decide how this works for you. I would say Put the people around you who have what you want. If the people who are around you are all divorced and running around, that is not what you want if you want to stay married. If you want to stay married, seek out couples who have fought for their marriage, who have fought for the ability to stay connected to God, stay connected to each other, and raise a family in sobriety. This is a lot of heavy topic. We would love to hear your feedback on that. So we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks.